back, Visions fans. Ready to play well here. Today we're talking about the Power Sash, the new piece of equipment released this week with the Raid. It's kind of a difficult piece of equipment to wrap your head around, who it's best on and why, where you want to use it. So all those things I'm hopefully going to answer here. Now, first things first, looking at the piece of equipment in particular, there are three builds: the Vital, the Shield, and the Barrier. Absolutely only go for the Shield build. The Vital, not nearly noteworthy enough on the HP. The Barrier, very insignificant on the Spirit increase. The Shield is definitely the way to go. That being said, 472 HP, 18 defense, 2 Spirit, -5 evade, and 18 crit avoid. You also get defense penetration of 20, as well as an increase of HP of 25% for 3 turns. Now, a step further, you got to ask who can actually wear this. So if we're looking at the equipable jobs, it actually is relatively limited to more like monks and pugilists and some very unique jobs. And if you wanted to see the list in particular of who that is, it's a pretty small list overall. It's Snow Queen, Tifa, Ziza Lamego, Winter Venera, and Raldor. Of this list, maybe only like 3 or 4 are competitive in the current state of the game. And for even from them, it's really Snow and Raldor which have like the most usage in the current game, potentially, just because the way the metas are currently set up. So we're going to use Snow as our primary example. He's obviously the major beneficiary of this. Which then begs the question, okay, well, if we're looking at Snow or Raldor or some of these characters, well, what would they alternatively have equipped so that we can kind of compare 2 pieces of equipment together? And if you're looking at this list, not only can he not equip a majority of this, like the Diamond Cloak and the Galmia Cloak, but some of these you wouldn't equip anyway. The Winter Cloak, the Mage's Habit, I don't think he's even eligible for those. But of the ones that he can, I really think it's the Platinum Robe, which does have a time and place with the Missile Meta and the 15% HP. The Smart Coat, technically, if you're going for a, anti-magic build, I guess. But it's really between the Power Slash and the Survival Vest. And if we're comparing the two of them side by side, let's look at HP here, 479 to 472, basically the same. Defense, 18 to 18, the same. Spirit, a little bit higher in the Survival Vest, but with the Spirit penetration that exists in the game, the difference between 6 and 2, basically nothing. They both have minus points to evade. That's okay. None of these characters are really evade units. And then the crit evade of 18 is really the extra here on the Power Sash that the Survival Vest does not have. Now, very noteworthy is the 10 unit resistance. That obviously will become a major factor here as we compare the two. But for now, let's actually look at the 4 major attributes that we're going to examine for the Power Sash. The first is the HP and the defense values in the comparison. And as we saw, they're basically the same. That's done. The next thing here is the crit evade 18%. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means damage-wise. The third, HP 25%. What does that look like when applied to some potential incoming damage? And finally, the defense penetration of 20. What does that kind of look like compared to what you get now as well? So real quickly, let's talk about what 25% extra HP looks like. Well, that scales off of your base HP, which is why it's such an important stat that I commonly talk about in the reviews. Well, for Snow, it's a little north of 900 HP. That's a fairly significant amount. Also noteworthy for Raldor, it's even more than what Snow gets, 942. Now, stepping away from the HP for a second, let's actually look at what the crit rate means in all of this in terms of crit avoid. So the whole concept of crit rate and crit avoid is kind of foreign to a lot of players because it, number one, does take a little work to calculate. Number two, crit avoid is really only important when going against like high crit units or high crit damage units or units that have, effects that proc off a crit hit. So time and place as well. But the way it theoretically works is that you have your modifiers. And in this example, we're just going to use let's say 165% attack. Let's say they have 60 modifiers. So you get a modifier of 225. Well, anytime you get a critical hit, you get an extra 25 modifier, and we're at a place now too where you get an extra crit damage of 10 on a Truststone passive, so altogether 35. So you go from 225 to 260. Now let's assume here that you have an attack stat of, well, let's say roughly 1800, and that's inclusive of like the dex 15%, the unit of, agility, whatever's in the mod of your attack you're using. Well, just doing some rough damage calcs, 1800 times 225 is 4050. 1800 times 2.6 is 4680. The big thing to take away from this is it's a 16% increase in damage when you get critically hit compared to not critically hit. Now, these numbers that I'm going to talk through aren't exactly what you'd see in game. I'm not accounting for every single thing, but the conclusions are all relative. The percentages really don't change. I can make this 1500. The 16% is still the same. I can make this something ridiculous and it's still a 16% damage increase given what we have for the modifier assumptions. But when you're using the Power Sash, it's with the intention that you are trying to build up your crit evade. So you can do that through Esper nodes, you can do that through Truststone passives, you can do that through Truststone set bonuses, a whole bunch of different scenarios there. So theoretically, if your assumption is that you're going to not get critically hit with the Power Sash, but you are going to get critically hit with the Survival Vest, well, then with the Survival Vest, you're going to take 16% more damage when that happens in this situation. Now, let's assume it's a single target attack, right? Well, even if you were to reduce this damage by that 10%, reduce this by that 10%. You would take 4,200 damage instead, which is still technically higher than not getting critically hit at all in the first place. So that's number one to talk about. It's a really difficult thing for a lot of people to actually put into practice, but does technically have some importance here. But now let's look at a couple other scenarios here as it pertains to total HP levels. So we're going to look at a couple different scenarios here. We're going to look at single target attacks, non-crit and crit, versus AoE attacks, non-crit and crit. So let's assume it's a single target of attack, and it's a non-crit ability. Well, let's assume our Snow has 12,000 HP normally. Well, with the Power Sash, he's going to get that 25% extra. So he's going to end up at 12.9 thousand as opposed to the 12,000. And so if we're looking at the damage, this 4,050 you see here is exactly what we just calculated up top here. This is our non-crit number, right? Well, so if it's single target, this is going to get reduced by that 10%. So yes, total damage, Snow will take less damage with the survival vest than the Power Sash, but if we're looking at what he has for remaining HP, with the survival vest only 8,300 here, and the Power Sash is about 8,800. So you retain about an extra 500 extra HP by having the Power Sash on in those opening turns of the battle. And just as a percent of total HP, it's roughly the same. But now let's look at a situation of when you get critically hit, and the conclusion is basically the same. You're going to take more damage here with the Power Sash, but you'll have more remaining HP with the Power Sash, and still about 1% less remaining as a percent of the total. But there's one thing to actually consider extra here that's kind of apples to oranges. Remember, if we're equipping the Power Sash, it's because we are trying to go for that crit evade build, which means we shouldn't be comparing this side by side here. We should instead be comparing them to non-crit situations versus crit situations. So if we look at your remaining HP, if you get non-critically hit here, 8868, well, remember, if we assume that when you're wearing the survival vest, you will get critically hit, but you're going to take 10% less damage on the unit attack, well, it's not 8,800 remaining HP versus 8,400 remaining HP here. You should actually compare across the two different scenarios. So you roughly have an extra 1,000 HP more when you don't get critically hit versus when you do, even if you get the 10% extra unit reduction. And this conclusion is even more exaggerated considering the fact that we're using single target only. If we instead come down to AoE, and so meaning they both take the same amount of damage on all these instances, well, you're naturally going to have more HP remaining on the Power Sash than you would on the Survival, and that's true for the crit as well. Now, the one thing that the Survival Vest does have going in its favor is that as the fight goes on, the more and more unit attacks you're going to take, you're going to get a reduction of 10%. That HP obviously is just a one-time little burst to start the battle, does nothing as the battle goes on. But if you're worried about your Snow dying too quickly, and the difference between him dying and not dying, or him proccing courage or not courage, is 1,000 HP, that actually matters. And particularly if you're using Velas, where if you just need him to live an extra turn so that Velas can have a little bit extra cast time to get that healing back up, that could potentially be the difference here. Not even considering the fact about the crit avoid still, which is still a really important thing to recall, that you're just going to take less damage on average, considering the meta that we're in right now. A lot of the ice units do have higher critical hit rates. Lightning as an element does have a ton of high crit units and abilities that proc if they get a critical hit. So it's a multifaceted answer to, how much damage you take at any one time. And obviously it's not a one situation fits all. It's really kind of depends on the matchup. Which brings us to the final attribute here. Again, if you were to say which one's better, well, the Power Sash has one extra piece of going forward, and it's that 20 defense penetration. So what does an extra 10 defense penetration really look like? And I say 10 because at this point, everyone should have a defense penetration 10 trust stone at all times, even on Snow. So when you look at the Power Sash of giving you 20, they don't stack. It's the highest of the two. So you get 20 as opposed to 10. Well, let's assume the target has 60 defense that you're attacking. Pretty standard for a lot of physical tanks. Well, if you have 20 defense penetration, and again, remember Snow does not have an innate passive that gives him that 40 that many DPS do. So let's assume you have 20 defense penetration only. Well, you ignore 20% of the 60. It's as if the enemy had 48%. If you only had 10 defense penetration, it's as if the enemy had 54%. So it's basically like an extra 6% more outgoing damage. It's not game breaking. I doubt it's going to be the difference between winning or losing your battles, but technically it is a damage increase there. And although 20% defense penetration might not be a big amount in the current state of the game, going from 10 to 20 is a 100% increase in defense penetration. You're literally doubling your defense penetration rate. So from this perspective on a tank, going from 10 to 20 is actually pretty impactful. It's really when you're going from like 60 defense pen to 70 defense pen, like that's not the same impact. You're already pretty high. So for someone like Snow, this actually is a decent increase in his overall damage output. But that's the Power Sash equipment analysis in a nutshell. Again, kind of a complex piece of equipment to analyze here, but I promise it's pretty competitive with what you might normally get for the Survival Vest. I won't say it's better, obviously. The Survival Vest has a great amount of value with that 10 unit resistance in perpetuity as the battle goes on forever. But the Power Sash does have some upside here where you will not die as quickly in the battle if you're getting chained down by 3 consecutive enemy attacks, let's say. You may not hit your courage as easily if you're getting the crit avoid, so they're not doing as much burst damage to you. And overall, he'll do a little bit more damage as the battle goes on as well, which can help you in a pinch. But that's it for now. Hopefully this is insightful and informative. Wish I could give you a little more of a conclusion in terms of, which one where. You'll have to kind of think about that more yourselves. But at least now, hopefully you know a little bit more about making that decision. So thanks for watching. I'll talk to you all soon.